How's it going, everybody? This podcast is brought to you by Rise Make Life Workout, a health, self-development, and lifestyle platform building a passionate community of knowledge seekers, creative dreamers, and future leaders.
For details on the latest Rise event that will feature expert speakers in the field of self-development and growth, check out www.rise-workout.com.
That's www.rise-workout.com. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Rise Optimize, where we make science simple to help optimize your health. My name's Shanae, and today I'm joined by physiotherapist and former athlete Emma Komocki. Hello, Emma.
Hello, thanks for having me. This is so exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's awesome. So the topic we are talking about today is REDS, which stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in sports. So we're going to be getting into what REDS is all about, which maybe we will just start off with a definition, of what REDS is.
So definitely. So interchangeable terms. So there's REDS, RED-S, but it stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in sport, as you've said. And essentially what it is just a mismatch of energy in the body. So if you think about the energy intake that you have for food, minus your daily cost of exercise, all the energy that's left at the end is what you have for your normal physiological functionings within your body. So essentially, if you're not eating enough, you're exercising too much, something's going to break down in the body, and these systems are going to start breaking down. So that's it pretty much in a nutshell in basic form. But the body's in low energy availability for those necessary functions. So that could be bone health, that could be growth and development, that could be anything in the body, your reproductive system. So we'll go into those like a little bit more, but there's certainly lots of things that encompass it.
Yeah. And so it's obviously something that's not usually treated by us as physios. So what sort of has sparked your interest into understanding RED-S?
Okay, so I think it's really clear for me to say that as a physiotherapist, I wouldn't be leading the management and the treatment and the recovery of these athletes that are identified to have RED-S. But as a physiotherapist working in sport, you're quite often the only medical that's with the players or the athletes on a day-to-day basis. So it's really important that you have a good and comprehensive understanding of the warning signs and the signals so that you can get the necessarily appropriate management for these players or athletes. So that's why, it's my responsibility to look after the welfare. And I think it's really important that we create this education piece around it, because I know a lot of your listeners are like personal trainers. So if they've got a good understanding of it as well, then they can just be like, oh, I'm a little bit unsure about this. And then they can make a necessary referral to the GP. Yeah,
because it's not necessary. Obviously, it's common in elite athletes and sports, but it's obviously something that if someone, like you said, is probably either too much energy expenditure and not enough energy coming in, they can still get the same symptoms.
Yeah, no, exactly. So you might see it in like regular gym goers. And as I said before, you don't have to be a professional athlete to be experiencing this. And quite often it's that level below that we need to be like a little bit more wary about, because the people at the top end of their sport have sports nutritionists, they have sports docs, they have psychologists that are around them all the time, and they've got that awareness piece, they get that education piece all the time. It's those people that are low that perhaps aren't aware that maybe are a little bit more susceptible. And that's definitely what I found from kind of my own experiences, is that I just lacked the education piece from back when I was an athlete.
So is this something that you sort of struggled with when you were an athlete?
So I was a 400 meter hurdler, like to a relatively decent standard. And I look back on my career, and I wasn't aware of REDS until like 3-4 years ago, because it's a fairly new phenomenon. But I look back and I just think, when I read it, I was like, oh my God, this is what I was experiencing when I was an athlete. And a lot of that stems from the fact, so I didn't have my periods for 3 years. So when I was competing, I didn't have my periods for 3 years. I experienced stress fractures, and I just had this ongoing thing. I just couldn't recover. Like my legs would be so tired, and I felt like I was doing all the 1%ers to try and recover, but my legs were just they just had this like dull, profuse ache. And I just tended to get like a lot of like little niggles and tendon problems. So they are all telltale signs of red S, but I never had anything like formally diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure, given the symptoms that I had, that I was experiencing it. And I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact, so I remember being like a younger athlete and joining a group of girls that are a bit older than me, but they were some of the best in the country. And one of them like turned to me and said, "Oh, are you still having your period?" And I was like, yeah, I'm still having my period. And they were like, "Oh, you're probably not training hard enough then." So I was like, "Oh, right, okay, well," so I like went home, did a old Google search, looked online, and I was like, and it said something like 60% of high level sports females don't experience their period. So I was like, "Oh, right, well, I guess that's what I need to be doing. I need to be training harder." So I put in extra runs and little things like that, because I was like, well, that's what it takes to get to the top. These are the kind of things that I need to start changing in my training. And a male coach, when I just joined a university team, he was like, "Oh, you probably need to just lose 3Ks to get down to a good race weight." And I look back and I think, where did you even get that number from? Because you had no objective information. Like, you literally grabbed that number from the air. And actually, we know now that athletes work well at different weights, and it's not one size fits all. So yeah, I just look back and I think I was a very impressionable young athlete, and I wanted to be, the best in my event. So I took what they said for gospel. And actually, I just wish I had the understanding that I have now about what red S is. And actually, my body was in this energy deprivation state.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Like you said, not obviously at the time doing the complete opposite, thinking that you needed to lose your period in order to be the best. Does it link into sort of what was, I guess, previously known as female athlete triad? Is that sort of what red S has continued on from?
Yeah, exactly. So I think at this stage, I'll just do a little share screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, so let's go to the start. Okay, so, I missed out on these. Oh, that was just quite a simple diagram. So you've got your food intake minus your daily cost of exercise equals the energy that you've got left for the body. Okay, yeah. So if we think about red S, it's a fairly new phenomenon in sport, but it's actually probably been going on for a long time. And essentially, it's a rebrand of what we know and a lot of people are aware of is the female athlete triad. So so the female athlete triad is here. Can you see my cursor as I circle?
Yep.
So perfect. So the female athlete triad was essentially females were underfueling or over-exercising, which would then cause a change in their hormones, and because of that would lose their menstrual function. Now, this lowers the estrogen in your body, and once you have lower estrogen in your body, you're more susceptible to things such as osteoporosis or stress fractures. So me, as a physiotherapist, that might be one of the first warning signs that we might get an athlete that's having reoccurring injuries or stress fractures, and then we might have a look and make sure that we get the necessary referral if we're questioning reds. But actually, what it didn't encompass is the whole spectrum of different physiological functions that it can happen on the body. So, for instance, you've got gastrointestinal growth and development, metabolism. It can affect all these different things. But what I will talk about is, I'll just talk quickly about the period. So why when someone's in relative energy deficiency that they actually stop having their period. So here is just a graph, and if we look at the bottom left, we've got the endometrial lining being shed. So that's day 1, and that's your period just here. And then what happens is, when you're in relative energy deficiency, you don't produce these hormones. So that's your estradiol, luteinizing hormone, and your follicle stimulating hormone. So we can all see that they start to spike at the time of ovulation. And if you don't have the hormones, you won't be building the endometrial wall. And then that's why, if you're in deficiency, you're not making these hormones, you're not going to build your lining, and you're not going to shed your lining. So that's why females, when they're exercising too much, will stop having their periods. But yeah, and as I said, that's only one thing. And actually, they realized that actually that's only, we're not encompassing one whole demographic. We're not including our males. So males can still experience red S, but it's easier to diagnose in females because we have that natural monthly warning sign of having a period. But what we see in males is they can experience all of these things, but they might have the lower testosterone, which affects their bone health. So they're exercising too much, which lowers their testosterone, which then can cause decreased bone health. And they might experience things like stress fractures or osteoporosis that way.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important to know, that it's both males and females can be affected by it.
Yeah. And that's one thing as well is, if we talk a little about each of these things. So quite often people might experience what seems like, so for our gastrointestinal, might be like IBS type symptoms. So they could be the type of people which constantly complain of like bloating, and they might go to the GP and have all the telltale signs of IBS. But quite often a GP might only be there or have a limited timed appointment, and they might not really have the underlying reason about why they're not breaking down their food, because their body doesn't have the energy in order to do that. But because, of course, they're presenting like IBS, they might put them on a food restriction diet where they're taking out certain food groups. And all of a sudden, this becomes more of a problem because you're restricting their dietary intake, or you're putting them on like a FODMAP diet or things of those. But quite often, the type of people that might experience RED-S are those that completely exclude diet groups. So like they might be dairy-free, vegan. So whenever they are exposed to that food group, all of a sudden they get bloating because, of course, the body is not used to breaking down that type of food anyway. So that's like your gastrointestinal. Then immune. So I guess like for you, like personal trainers, it might be the type of client that keeps continuing to cancel their appointment because they continue to say, oh, I'm actually feeling pretty unwell. So if you're not fit and healthy and you don't have the energy, you're not going to have the ability to fight off colds or fight off COVID or, fight off certain things. So, you then have repeated infections or repeated coughs and colds. I've already touched a bit on the endocrine. So that's obviously like hormones. So if you don't have the energy, then you're not going to have the hormones to be able to function a lot of these processes. Now, metabolic is an interesting one. So people think, and I feel like this is where maybe I got misdiagnosed as well, is you have to be a certain BMI to be in RED-S. That's not the case at all. So I would go and they'd weigh me and they'd work out by BMI, and they were like, oh, no, you're fine because you're not underweight. Whereas actually we're seeing this in people that, this might be someone that actually they don't have that muscle definition, and because the body holds onto that fat because you're in relative starvation mode. So actually you start to stop being able to break down food as well because your body doesn't have the energy to break it down. So it holds on to fat stores because your body's in starvation mode. And, so it affects again, if you don't have psychological functioning, then if you don't have the energy, then you're going to see effects in obviously growth and development, and then maybe taking longer to recovery from injuries. So that's just touching on a few of those things. But the main thing to think about is the body always prioritizes movement. So if we think back to like prehistoric times, the hunter and gatherer, there might be periods of time where food was unavailable to you. So it would hold onto your stores, and then all of a sudden you had to sprint and catch your dinner. It would make sure that you had enough energy to go to the muscles to allow you to go and catch your food, so that then you will be able to have that. But it makes all these other systems and all these other bodily systems break down.
And yeah, all very good things to be mindful of. Like you said, I think a lot of people are aware of the sort of the female triad symptoms, but it's really worthwhile being aware of all those other symptoms. And how are they usually diagnosed? I assume people probably generally have to have a lot of tests to sort of be ticking all those boxes to have that diagnosis.
So somebody at some point would have to kind of make a referral to a sports doc. So it's always a sports doc that would lead the process of recovery for RED-S. But they would do like blood tests, essentially. So they do like a full workup of blood tests. So some of the things they might be looking for is low testosterone in males. And that might be like a telltale sign for guys, is because testosterone is lower, that they might stop experiencing erections. So that's one question, rather than the menstrual cycle that you would ask specifically about guys, has your sex drive reduced, or are you stopping like morning erections? So that can be one good indicator. So look for testosterone, look for like estrogen, look for your luteinizing hormone, your follicle stimulating hormone with regards to periods. They might look at thyroid function. So if you have reduced metabolism, then you might see an effect on the thyroid. So they do like a full blood profile looking for these telltale signs. And then once it's diagnosed, then they would think about managing it appropriately. Oh, I just had this as well. So this is, these are your performance threats. So this is something, because quite often it can get people to actually engage in treatment, particularly for athletes. All athletes care about is how they perform. They don't care. Sometimes actually their buy-in when you tell them their gastrointestinal function is going to be off, or like psychological is going to be off. They're like, well, okay, well, I just want to perform. So they're quite often, this is how you get them to buy into their treatment, is by saying, oh, you're more likely to get injured. You're more likely to not have the effects of training, and you're not going to be improving. Decreased coordination, irritability, depression, and decreased muscle strength. So this is often easier for athletes to buy into, is telling them it's going to affect their performance. But that's all I had in terms of graphs and stuff. So you asked me about treatment, didn't you?
Yeah, so sort of once someone's presenting with all those symptoms and have the diagnosis from there, how would it be treated or managed?
Yeah, so obviously the first thing is making sure that you understand what is the driver for someone being in Red S. Is it the fact that they're undereducated? So they just don't know that they're underfueling their body for the exercise that they do, in which case the remedy and in this case kind of the medication is food. So it's really easy. You just educate them and tell them that you need to be eating more in order to sustain their functions, in order to improve their activity long term. But one thing to say is quite often people will see at the beginning a improvement in their performance, then there'll be a stagnation, then there'll be a massive drop off. So, that's important to say, is you might start to see people improve in the early days, but longevity is that it's going to have a decrease in performance. And the other types are the intentional, and the people that are actually restricting their food intake because maybe there's body image issues going on. And that's in a lot of sports. It might be sports, for instance, where you have to make weight. So we see that in boxers, or we see that in particular classes in rowing, is they have to get down to a certain weight. So they might be restricting their food intake. It might be sports where you have to parade yourself in a leotard. So therefore you're going to restrict your food intake because you want to look. And I think there's even like aesthetic points still to this day in certain sports, or athletics. You're running around in a bra and pants, so your body image is going to be on show. These are the type of athletes that might be more susceptible. And also, like where body to weight ratio is really important. So actually being a lighter weight is seen as a performance advantage. So that could be like your long jump or your high jump or your rock climbing. Sports like that are more susceptible, and those people are more likely to be at risk. So if there's body shaming going on, and I just want to say that there's a really good interview with a runner called Mary Kane, and she was a distance runner who trained with Alberto Salazar in America. And she has this interview on YouTube that's really, really powerful about how he was body shaming her in order to lose a lot of weight, and was saying, she's fat and that's why she's not making times. She was the best in America at one point for her age group. And then going into that, suddenly she started to see her performance drop. So quite often in certain sports, there is this body shaming and this body shaming culture that we need to stop, because otherwise these athletes aren't going to be performing to the best of their ability. And then I guess once you work out if it's intentional or non-intentional, these are the types of athletes where you would be worried that there'd be a psychological issue, that you'd need to get some psych support and you'd need to get a nutritionist involved, because you need to manage the underlying reasons first, and then you can go on to the treatment. And you might even have to stop them exercising, which athletes hate. So it might have to be for a period of time, you're not going to be able to exercise. And then we can start to get you into training once we have your food intake under control. And then, so it's always a very multidisciplinary approach, but just making sure that we know what the underlying factor that's driving it so that we can manage it appropriately.
Yeah. And then, like you said, I guess with those elite athletes, they are always going to have a team of people helping them through that. I guess for the everyday person, maybe that, like you said, could potentially just maybe me overtraining through the gym. Whether they might have, if they're into bodybuilding, they might have a competition on. That's probably another group of people that would be likely restricting in order for those aesthetic goals, but still training quite a lot, and that they might not have that team of a nutritionist and a sports doctor and things like that. I guess it's good for them to understand the symptoms so that they could potentially self-diagnose if they needed to, and then go and get that help if they needed it.
Exactly, yeah. And if you feel like you're starting to display some of the symptoms that we've talked about, then you need to make yourself a necessary referral. And one thing I want to make really clear is, and I didn't think this at the time from my own experiences, if you're not having your period, it's not normal. So let's get rid of the taboo that it's normal if you're exercising a lot that you're not going to have your period. It's actually a warning sign that you're healthy. So don't buy into the stigma that actually not having a period is normal. I just kind of want to say that. And if you're not having a period, you need to go and seek medical advice to try and get things going how they normally should and get that natural monthly thermometer going again. And yeah, so just if you're a gym goer and you don't have access to that, I think the main thing is just kind of raising awareness so people understand, okay, well, I feel like I'm relating to a couple of the symptoms here. Let me take myself to my doctor and just say that to them, because, you know, sometimes they have a shorter window and they might not fully understand how comprehensive your exercise regime is. So say, you know, I might not be, I'm just a little bit worried that I'm displaying the symptoms of REDS, and then they'll refer you onto a sports physician or a sports nutritionist so that you can be able to manage that effectively. And it might be, you know, if someone's working with a personal trainer, the personal trainer, if it's like a male personal trainer to a female client, might not be comfortable asking the questions around their period and things. So one thing that we're quite good at in sport is that we send, you know, daily wellness questionnaires or how the readiness to train. You could even put it as a metric on either their initial consultation, like, are you having your periods, or are you having your menstrual cycle? And it could just be a yes, no. And then if they're saying no, then it's just a conversation that you have, you know, later down the line. But, you know, maybe make it so it's not that face-to-face, so it doesn't feel so invasive perhaps, or just making it like a metric that they could maybe include in their collection of data.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very very worthwhile point to note for trainers out there. But yeah, I think they're all great things that we've covered today in regards to going through all the symptoms, because like I said, I think if you're not an elite athlete with that team around you that are going to be helping to highlight those things and make you aware of that, the everyday person could be, like you said, maybe thinking that they're not really, they don't feel that they're overtraining, they don't feel like they're underfueling themselves, and therefore might be ignoring some of those symptoms or ignoring and think, oh, well, it's only been a year that I haven't had my period, not a big deal. Yeah, so like you said, it's good to highlight all those things and think, no, if you're sort of ticking a few of these boxes, it's definitely worthwhile getting yourself checked out.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything we can do to raise the awareness. And if you wanted to have a look at like Dr. Stacey Sims, so she's a sports nutritionist, she's got some really good work out there. Sarah Beeble is like one of the leaders in New Zealand. So she's based in Queenstown, but she's doing a lot of telehealth consultations at the moment. So you can always get your GP to like refer you on to Sarah Beeble, who's leading that. And both of those are on the Whisper board, which is part of High Performance New Zealand. And that's like healthy women in sport, but obviously RED does include our male population too.
Awesome. I think we've covered that topic quite well today, Emma. Do you have anything else that you want to add in, or?
No, but I think the main thing is just chatting about it, increasing the awareness, and yeah, let's just like get rid of the stigma that not having periods is normal. And if you're worried, just chat about it to someone and then they can refer you on.
Yeah, awesome. And where can people contact you if maybe they have any more questions or they want access to some info?
Probably the best way is maybe send me a message on LinkedIn.
Nice.
There's not many of me with my surname, so quite easy to find.
Awesome. And I'll add some resources into the show notes as well. And be sure to check us out at WeAreRiseNZ on Instagram if you're not following along already. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks for having me, Sinead. That was fun.